Hi guys, welcome back to another video. In my last video I talked about why type 1 diabetics should eat high carb diets, high carb plant-based diets that is. And in today's video I'm going to talk about how to calculate the real amount of carbs that you're eating which actually need insulin. So many people realize this, guys, but not all of the carbs that you consume actually require insulin. So there are two carbohydrates we need to look at here. The first one will be fiber and the second one is fructose. So let's look at fiber. So fiber is a carbohydrate which is only ever found in plants. You'll never find it in animal products, and fiber basically has many health benefits. So fiber fights the development of cancer, fiber fights heart disease, fiber blunts blood sugar spikes, and fiber promotes healthy bowel movements. But fiber, despite all this, is never actually absorbed by the body, it's simply passed out. So because of that, it will never actually need insulin. So the calculation is always this: total carbohydrates minus fiber equals net carbs, and that is the calculation you need to do at a minimum. So let's do some examples. So the first example could be, let's say, take a meal that I've done recently, and these are rough figures. So I recently ate a meal of about 200 grams of carbohydrates, and about 30 grams of that was fiber. So the calculation is 200 minus 30 equals 170 grams of carbs that my body is actually absorbing that require insulin. Another example could be, let's say, 120 grams of carbohydrates. Let's say 20 grams of that is fiber. So 120 minus 20 equals 100 grams is the real amount of carbs that your body is going to absorb that require insulin. So the second carbohydrate, guys, that we're going to look at is fructose. So fructose is absorbed by the body, unlike fiber, but it actually doesn't require insulin. And the reason for that is that fructose is metabolized by the liver. So normally you have to inject insulin so the carbohydrates can actually get into the cells in the body. But when you consume fructose, what happens is the liver simply absorbs this and metabolizes it. So but if you ever inject insulin for fructose, or take fructose into consideration, there's a good chance you're going to have a hypoglycemic attack. And I discovered this the hard way November last year. So November last year I adopted a whole food plant-based diet. I went high carb and I started to consume a lot of fruit for breakfast and even dinner as a meal, and I never actually removed the fructose from the calculation. Part of my hypoglycemic attacks was that I was becoming more insulin sensitive as a result of the plant-based diet. But I also forgot to remove fructose from the calculation, and in fact I actually didn't even know to remove fructose in the first place. And thankfully, while I was watching one of Youre Rider's videos, he talked about how fructose doesn't actually cause an insulin response in the body when he was explaining that fruit doesn't cause type 2 diabetes. And straight away I realised why I was getting hypoglycemic attacks. I found it quite hard to believe, and I went online and I looked up, and sure enough, fructose does not require insulin. So the danger there is, guys, if you eat a meal of fruit and you don't remove the fructose, you're going to have a hypoglycemic attack possibly, because the real amount of carbs that your body is that actually needs insulin for is a lot less. So for example, you could, let's say, have 100 grams of dates, and roughly off the top of my head about 75 grams of that would be sugar, and probably about half of that figure, or a little bit less, is going to be fructose. So roughly about 40% of dates is fructose. So the danger there is, as you can see, if you were to have a large meal of dates or apples or fruit that is quite rich in fructose, you don't remove it from the calculation, and you end up injecting too much insulin. So the next calculation, guys, quite simply is this. So we know that we need to take fiber into consideration. We know we need to take fructose into consideration when we are mainly eating fruit. Now then, it's true that fructose is present in vegetables, but it's to a much less degree. So now you can take that into consideration if you want, but you don't really need to. So the calculation I'm going to give you guys is quite simply this: total carbohydrates minus fiber minus fructose equals net carbs. So it's something I made up myself. If you see anyone else use it online, they're using it independently of me, I imagine. And it's something I made up a while ago when I realised that, one, the body doesn't need insulin for fibre because we don't absorb it. And I looked on chronometer.com, which is a website I use to calculate all my carbs on and log all my food on. And I saw that they did like a information or like a field box in there called net carbs, and it was the total carbs minus the fibre equals net carbs. So, and in addition to that, I also follow a legendary investor called Benjamin Graham, and he pioneered this equation a while ago called net current asset value per share. I'm not going to go into that. Basically, I just kind of combined Ben Graham's calculation of net with net fibre and removing the fructose, and I came up with this concept of net carbs. So the calculation then we'll use as an example is, in fact, well, I'll just get my laptop and I'll give you an example of my breakfast this morning. So for this morning, guys, my breakfast, I had bananas and dates, and the total amount of carbs I had was 167.2 gram carbs. I had 17.2 grams of fibre, and I had 51.5 grams of fructose. So the calculation there, quite simply, is this: 167.2 minus 17.2 grams of fibre minus 51.5 grams of fructose equals net carbs of 98.5 grams. So out of that meal of 167 grams of carbohydrates, the actual amount of carbohydrates which I was consuming that my body only required insulin for was 98.5 grams. I will now look at my dinner, which I had earlier on, which was potatoes, parsnips, pak choy, sweet corn, lima beans, white rice, turmeric, and just a little bit of salt. So let's look at that meal there. So in my dinner earlier on, I had 249.1 grams total carbohydrates. Of that, 31.1 grams was fibre and 6.8 grams was fructose. Now, like I said, that there is a small amount of fructose. You don't really need to remove that, but I like to do everything and get everything the best I can. So the calculation there, guys, is 249.1 subtract 31.1 grams of fibre subtract 6.8 grams of fructose equals 211.2 grams net carbs that I was actually going to absorb, which require insulin. So that there, guys, is basically an example of what I eat and how I work it out. So just to reiterate then, guys, there are two forms of carbohydrates which do not require insulin. They are fibre and fructose. Fibre does not need insulin because it is not absorbed by your body. Fructose is absorbed by your body but is metabolized by your liver, so it doesn't need any insulin. And the calculation is always this at a minimum if you're not eating fruit, and that is total carbs minus fibre equals net carbs. But if you're going to eat fruit, then the calculation is this: total carbs minus fibre minus fructose equals net carbs. And from there you can then work out your insulin correctly. So guys, I hope that was useful. I hope that made sense to everyone. If you didn't really understand that, feel free to put your comments, questions, criticisms in the comments section below. I will respond to you, I promise. In addition to that, please check out the description of this video, and what I'll do is I'll just basically type out what I've said there, and I'll also try and put a few links to some nutritional websites on fiber and fructose, and I'll also give you a link to chronometer.com which you can use to access. I hope this has been really informative, I hope it's been useful, and until next time, God bless, and I'll hopefully be back soon with another video. All the best. Goodbye now. Cancer, fibre fights heart disease, fibre blunts blood sugar spikes, and fibre promotes healthy bowel movements. But fibre, despite all this, is never actually absorbed by the body, it's simply passed out. So because of that, it will never actually need insulin. So, hi guys, welcome back to another video. In my last video, I talked about why type 1 diabetics should eat high carb diets, high carb plant-based diets that is. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about how to calculate the real amount of carbs that you're eating which actually need insulin. So not a lot, many people realize this, guys, but not all of the carbs that you consume actually require insulin. So there are two carbohydrates we need to look at here. The first one will be fiber, and the second one is fructose. So let's look at fiber. So fiber is a carbohydrate which is only ever found in plants. You'll never find it in animal products, and fiber basically has many health benefits. So fiber fights the development of... So the calculation is always this: total carbohydrates minus fiber equals net carbs, and that is the calculation you need to do at a minimum. So let's do some examples. So the first example could be, let's say, take a meal that I've done